We're placing a lien on your house, effective immediately. The HOA president's voice dripped with satisfaction as she handed me the letter. I'd been offshore for 3 months, welding underwater on oil platforms, and came home to find my life had become a legal nightmare. All because of a boat dock I'd bought for $1 single, 12 barnacle-crusted posts that groaned with every wave. She wanted what was legally mine, and she didn't care how she got it. What started as a petty property dispute turned into forged signatures, federal crimes, and a courtroom showdown that exposed everything. Comment below where you're watching from, because this gets absolutely insane. It was a Monday morning in March of 2019 when I pulled into my driveway and found 200 pounds of concrete blocking my way home. After 3 months of 12-hour shifts welding pipeline connections in a diving bell in the Gulf, this was my welcome back. Not just blocking the driveway, sitting dead center, like someone had calculated the exact spot that would cause maximum inconvenience. The block had been spray-painted in thick red letters, unauthorized structure violation. Next to it stood Vivian Cartwright, 61 years old, HOA president, wearing a pink blazer that probably cost more than my truck payment. Her hair was perfect and loud in that practiced way that said, "I need to speak to your manager," from 50 yards away. She stood by the concrete block like a trophy, a smile held for the selfie there. I sat in my truck for a moment, hands still on the wheel. 3 months of missing my daughter's voice, counting down the days until I could come home. And this. I didn't honk, didn't yell. I just took out my phone, checked the timestamp, and started taking photos. The block, the spray paint, Vivian's satisfied smile, all of it. Then I got out of my truck. "Welcome home, Leland," Vivian called out like we were old friends. "We've sent you 3 warnings about this. You can't say we didn't try to resolve this civilly." Her voice had that particular sweetness that people use when they know they're being unreasonable but don't care. I walked closer, keeping my expression neutral. "Warnings about what, exactly?" I asked. She pointed past my house down toward the lake. "That dock. That rotting eyesore you refuse to remove. It's dragging down everyone's property values." I followed her gesture to the structure in question. 12 weathered posts, barnacled and sun-bleached by decades of heat and water, rose from the shallow lake bottom like forgotten grave markers there alone. The decking creaked, with gaps you could slide a hand through, and the whole structure complained with every shift in the water there. It smelled like wet wood and stale water, a reminder of something slowly turning back to nature. It looked exactly like what it was, an old boat dock that someone had stopped maintaining around 1995. "The dock is on my property," I said, keeping my voice level. "I checked the deed before I bought it." Vivian laughed. Actually, I laughed. "The HOA has jurisdiction over any structure that affects community aesthetics. It's in our bylaws." I reached into my truck and pulled out a folder I'd been keeping in the cab. I'd checked the deed when I closed 6 months ago, a separate parcel with its own tax ID, and I had the survey map and an attorney email to prove it. The dock sat outside HOA jurisdiction according to the county records. I handed her the survey map. She barely glanced at it. "These papers don't mean anything," she said, handing it back like it was contaminated. "The HOA has its own rules." That's when I knew this wasn't about aesthetics or property values. This was about something else entirely. I just didn't know what yet. "I'll review the CC&Rs again," I said. "Covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the legal framework that governs homeowner associations. But if the dock is outside your boundary, you don't have authority over it." Vivian's smile tightened. "We'll see about that." She walked back to her car, a white Lexus that probably had more technology than my diving equipment. The concrete block stayed exactly where it was. After she left, I called Knox Rafferty. We'd worked together in Houston 5 years ago before he went to law school and I went offshore. Now he specialized in property litigation, and I had a feeling I was going to need him. "Knox, I've got a situation," I said when he picked up. I explained the concrete block, the warnings, and the dock. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always appreciated about Knox. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "If the dock is genuinely outside their jurisdiction, they've got no legal standing," he said. "But Leland, these HOA boards, they don't always care about standing. They escalate. They make your life hell until you give up and move." I looked down at the posts. I'd bought the dock for $1 as part of the house purchase. It was technically a separate transaction, a quirk of the original 1980s development. The previous owner had wanted to keep it separate for tax reasons, and that separation had remained in the records ever since. The real estate attorney had explained it simply. This is its own parcel, different deeds, different tax assessments, totally separate from the HOA common areas. You're buying it for $1 because nobody else wants to deal with maintaining it. I signed without hesitation. Not because I cared about the dock's monetary value, I just wanted a place where I could teach my daughter to kayak. Sloane was 10 years old, living with her mother in Tampa after the divorce. I got her every other weekend, and the custody agreement specified I needed to live within 100 miles. Clearwater was conveniently located between Tampa, where my daughter lived, and the port of Miami, where my offshore contracts began. This house, this lake, this dock, they were my way of staying connected to the one person who mattered. I'd even let Sloane name it. One Saturday afternoon in October, she stood at the end of the dock, wobbling slightly as the boards creaked under her weight, and asked if she could make a sign. "What kind of sign?" I'd asked. "A name sign," she'd said, grinning, "like Sloane's Landing or something." So we made one together, just a piece of plywood with her handwriting in blue paint. Sloane's Landing. I'd mounted it on the first post where it still hung, fading but readable. That dock wasn't just wood and nails to me. It was the only thing I owned that my daughter had claimed as partly hers. Knox's voice brought me back. "Do you want to fight this, or do you want to move?" It was a fair question. Fighting an HOA could cost tens of thousands in legal fees. It could drag on for years. I could sell the house, find something else, avoid the whole mess. But then I thought about Sloane asking why we had to leave. Thought about explaining that sometimes bullies win because good people don't want the hassle of standing up. "I'm not moving," I said. "Then document everything," Knox replied. "Every letter, every email, every interaction. If this goes legal, you'll need a paper trail." I thanked him and hung up. Then I walked down to the dock, past the concrete block still sitting in my driveway, and stood at the end where the water lapped against the posts. I didn't know then that this rotting dock would become a battleground. Didn't know that Vivian Cartwright had plans for this exact piece of land, plans worth millions of dollars. Didn't know that what started as petty harassment would escalate into forgery, fraud, and federal crimes. All I knew was that I'd bought this dock legally, for $1, and I wasn't going to let someone take it just because they had a gavel and a bad attitude. The lake was calm that afternoon. The water reflected the sky in perfect stillness, like glass. I stood there for a long time, listening to the groan of old wood under my feet, and made a decision. If Vivian wanted a war, I'd give her one, but I'd fight it the right way, with documents, evidence, and the law on my side. Because the thing about bullies is they're used to people backing down. They're not used to people who know how to build a case. The divorce papers came through in the fall of 2017. I was living in Houston at the time, working for a major offshore drilling contractor, pulling in about $140,000 a year. Good money, stable career. But none of it mattered when my ex-wife's attorney handed me the custody arrangement. 2 weekends a month. That was it. 2 weekends to be a father to a girl who used to wait by the window every evening for me to come home. The judge had been sympathetic but clear. My work schedule made me an unreliable primary guardian. 6 months offshore, 6 months on land, repeat indefinitely. It was the nature of underwater welding, and it was killing my chance to watch my daughter grow up. So I made a choice. I requested a transfer to Gulf contracts that ran shorter rotations, 3 months out, 1 month back, instead of the old 6 and 6. It cut my income by about 15%, but it doubled my time with Sloane. The only catch was I needed to relocate to Florida. Tampa was where my ex had moved with her new husband, and the custody agreement required me to stay within 100 miles. I started looking at properties in February of 2018. Most of what I could afford was too far north or too close to the tourist traps where rent ate up half my paycheck. Then I found the listing for the Clearwater Lake House. It was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, built in the early 90s with that particular blandness that screamed affordable housing development. But it had a backyard that sloped down to the water, and at the end of that slope was the dock. The listing described it as additional waterfront structure, sold separately, as is. I didn't understand what that meant until the real estate agent explained. The dock was technically its own parcel, different deeds, different tax IDs, completely separate from the HOA that governed the main house. Some quirk from the original development in 1987. The previous owner wanted it gone. Liability concerns, maintenance costs, the usual worries. He'd sell it for $1 just to have it off his books. I walked down to look at it during the showing. The dock groaned underfoot like it remembered better days, each step producing a creak that felt almost conversational. The wood was sun-bleached and soft in places, and when I knelt down to test one of the joints, I could feel decades of weather in the grain. It wasn't much, but I could picture Sloane sitting there with a fishing rod, or learning to tie nautical knots, or helping me load kayaks. It was the kind of place where a kid could feel like they had their own little corner of the world. So I bought it. $1 for the dock, $280,000 for the house, and suddenly I had a home within driving distance of my daughter. The first time I brought Sloane to see it, she ran straight down to the water. "Can we go swimming?" she asked. "Not until we fix the dock," I told her. "But we can make it nice, paint it, name it, whatever you want." Her face lit up in that way that makes every sacrifice worth it. "Can we really name it?" she asked. "Sure," I said. "It's ours." That's when she came up with Sloane's Landing. We spent that first Saturday building a sign together, just a piece of plywood with her name painted in blue. I hung it on the first post, and for the first time since the divorce, I felt like I was doing something right. The house became our routine. Every other weekend, Sloane would arrive on Friday evening with her backpack and her stuffed dolphin. We'd spend Saturday working on the dock, replacing a plank here, tightening a bolt there, making slow progress towards something functional. Sunday mornings, we'd take the kayaks out, drifting along the shoreline while she told me about school and friends and all the small dramas of being 10 years old. It wasn't much, but it was home. Then I met the HOA. The first encounter was at a mandatory welcome meeting in June of 2018. The community center was one of those aggressively beige rooms with folding chairs and a projector screen showing a PowerPoint about neighborhood standards. Vivian Cartwright ran the meeting with the energy of someone who genuinely enjoyed wielding a gavel. She went through the rules: lawn height, fence colors, approved mailbox designs, everything you'd expect from a suburban HOA on a power trip. At the end, she asked if anyone had questions. I raised my hand. "I just bought the property on Lakeshore Drive," I said. "The one with the dock. I wanted to confirm that the dock itself isn't under HOA jurisdiction." Her expression cooled, like someone had adjusted a thermostat. "What do you do for work, Mr. Pierce?" she asked. "Underwater welder," I said. "Offshore contracts." Her tone shifted to something I recognized immediately, condescension mixed with dismissal. "Oh," she said, drawing out the word. "So you're a handyman for boats?" I didn't correct her. "Correct." Didn't explain that commercial diving requires certifications most people never even hear about, or that a single mistake at depth can kill you faster than you can exhale. I just smiled. "Something like that." She turned back to her notes. "The HOA has authority over all structures visible from common areas. If we determine your dock is an eyesore, you'll need to address it." That should have been my warning. But I was new to the neighborhood, new to Florida, and I didn't want to start a fight on day one. So I nodded, made a mental note to review the CC&Rs more carefully, and left. The next 6 months were quiet. I worked my offshore rotation, came back for Sloane's weekends, and slowly fixed up the dock. Nothing fancy. Just replacing the worst planks, reinforcing the posts, making it safe enough that I didn't worry about my daughter falling through. I bought 2 kayaks, bright yellow ones that Sloane picked out herself. We'd paddle out to the middle of the lake and she'd ask me about my work. "What's it like being underwater for so long?" she'd ask. "Quiet," I'd tell her. "Dark, but peaceful, in a way." In February of 2019, I got the first letter. It arrived by certified mail while I was offshore, so I didn't see it until I got back in March. The letter was formal, printed on HOA letterhead, signed by Vivian Cartwright in aggressive cursive. "Dear Mr. Pierce, your boat dock violates community aesthetic standards per section 7.3 of our CC&Rs. You have 30 days to remove or renovate the structure to acceptable standards. Failure to comply will result in fines." I read it 3 times, trying to find the logic. Then I pulled out my copy of the deed and the survey map. I had sent them copies of the deed proving it was outside their boundary, a separate parcel with its tax ID. They chose to ignore it. I sent a polite email response with copies of the relevant documents attached. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. The dock is not part of the HOA common area. Please see attached survey and deed." I didn't get a reply. What I got instead was silence, followed by the concrete block in March. But there was something else I didn't know yet, something I wouldn't learn until much later. My neighbor, Porter Henley, would eventually tell me the full story. Porter was 71, a retired union worker who'd lived in the neighborhood since before the HOA existed. One evening in April, after the concrete block incident, he stopped by with a six-pack and a warning. "You need to know something about Vivian," he said, settling into one of my patio chairs. "Back in 2010, she tried to buy that dock parcel, offered the previous owner $12,000 for it. He turned her down. She wanted to build a private marina for HOA members, charge slip fees, and make it a revenue generator." I stared at him. "Why didn't he sell?" Porter shrugged. "I didn't like her mostly. I thought she was too pushy, so he kept it until you came along." He took a sip of his beer. "She's driven 3 families out of this neighborhood in the last 5 years. Uses the HOA rules like a weapon. Finds violations, stacks up fines, makes life unbearable until people sell and leave." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Why hasn't anyone stopped her?" I asked. Porter laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because most people don't want to fight. They just want to live in peace. And Vivian knows that." He looked at me seriously. "I'm telling you this because I like you. You're good to your kid. You keep to yourself. But if you're planning to fight this, you need to know what you're up against. She doesn't give up." I thought about that for a long time after Porter left. Thought about selling the house, finding somewhere else, avoiding the whole mess. But then I thought about Sloane's sign hanging on that first post. Sloane's Landing, the only place that was truly ours. I wasn't rich, didn't have a mansion or a fancy car, but I had a dock that my daughter had named, and I'd be damned if I was going to let someone take it just because they wanted it and I was too tired to fight back. So I made my decision that night, sitting on my back porch, watching the moonlight reflect off the lake. If Vivian wanted the dock, she could try to take it, but I wasn't going anywhere. And if she wanted to play games with HOA rules and legal threats, then fine. I'd learn the rules better than she knew them. I'd document everything, and I'd win. Not because I was tougher or richer or more connected, but because I was right, and I knew how to build a case that couldn't be torn down. The second letter arrived in late March, 5 days after the concrete block incident. This time it wasn't a warning, it was a bill. $50 per day, retroactive to the date of the first letter I'd received in February. 30 days at $50. $1,500 in fines for refusing to remove a structure I legally owned on land the HOA had no jurisdiction over. I called the HOA office and got their secretary, a woman whose voice sounded like she'd answered this kind of call 1,000 times before. "You need to file a formal appeal," she said. "The board meets on the first Thursday of every month. You can present your case then." So I did exactly that. The meeting was on April 15th, 7 in the evening at the community center. I showed up 20 minutes early with a folder containing everything. The original deed from 1987 shows the dock as a separate parcel. The survey map from the county with clear boundary lines, photographs with measurements. A printed copy of Florida Statute 720, the law governing homeowner associations with relevant sections highlighted. I'd even brought a letter from my real estate attorney confirming that the dock fell outside HOA authority. I wasn't taking chances. The board sat at a folding table in the front of the room, Vivian in the center, flanked by 2 others. The vice president was a man in his mid-50s who'd introduced himself as a commercial broker. The treasurer was a woman around 50 who barely looked up from her notepad. When my turn came, I stood and presented my case. I spoke for 10 minutes, walking through each document, explaining the legal separation of the parcels, showing the survey boundaries. I kept my tone professional, factual, unemotional. This was just information. Evidence. The kind of thing that should end a dispute before it becomes a problem. When I finished, I looked at the board and waited. They looked at each other. Nobody asked questions. Nobody requested to see the documents more closely. Vivian just smiled that tight smile and said, "Thank you, Mr. Pierce. We'll take this under advisement." That was it. No discussion, no debate. Just a polite dismissal. 5 days later, I got an email. "The board has voted unanimously. The dock structure must be removed by May 1st, 2019. Failure to comply will result in continued daily fines." No explanation, no legal justification, just a decision handed down like it was carved in stone. I wrote back immediately, attaching the same documents again. "Please provide the legal basis for this decision under Florida Statute 720. The dock is not within your jurisdiction." I never got a response to that email. What I got instead was another letter a week later. This one announced an update to the community's CC&R's new rules, effective immediately. All waterfront structures must comply with 2019 marine safety codes, retroactive to all existing installations. I read that line 3 times. Retroactive. They were trying to apply new rules to a structure built in 1987, 3 decades before these regulations even existed. I pulled up Florida HOA law on my laptop that night, sitting at my kitchen table with a beer I barely touched. The statute was clear. Homeowner associations cannot enforce rules retroactively. You can't create a regulation today and punish someone for violating it yesterday. It's a basic legal principle, the same reason ex post facto laws are unconstitutional. But Vivian either didn't know that or didn't care. I started keeping a log. Every interaction, every letter, every email went into a spreadsheet with dates and timestamps. I bought a scanner and digitized everything. When I was offshore, I'd forward copies to my personal email and to Knox just to make sure I had backups in multiple places. It was something I'd learned working in the oil industry. Document everything, every safety check, every equipment test, every deviation from procedure. Because when something goes wrong at 300 feet below the surface, the only thing that saves you is the paper trail proving you followed protocol. I figured the same principle applied here. Meanwhile, the fines kept adding up on paper. $50 a day became $100 a day in the next letter. No explanation for the increase, just a new number on the invoice. By early May, according to their accounting, I owed them nearly $9,000. I didn't pay a cent. I wasn't going to fund my own harassment. But the psychological pressure was real. Every time I checked the mail, there was another letter. Every time I came home from the grocery store, there was another notice taped to my door. The neighbors started talking. Some of them approached me with sympathy, others with suspicion. A few stopped making eye contact altogether. Vivian had started her campaign on social media, posting photos of the dock with captions about property values and community standards. She never mentioned my name directly, but everyone knew which house she was talking about. I watched my daughter's face one Saturday when she saw a post someone had shared. "Dad, why are people saying mean things about our dock?" she asked. I didn't have a good answer. How do you explain to a 10-year-old that some people use rules as weapons? Does that power make certain people cruel? I just told her the truth in the simplest way I could. Some people don't like that we have something they want, but we're not doing anything wrong, and we're not giving up. Knox called me in mid-May with advice. Send them a cease and desist. Make it formal. Let them know that if they continue this harassment, you'll file suit for violation of Florida Statute 720. So that's what we did. Knox drafted a letter on his firm's letterhead, laying out the legal case in language that left no room for misinterpretation. The dock was outside their jurisdiction. Their actions constituted harassment. If they continued, I would pursue legal remedies including damages for emotional distress and abuse of authority. We sent it certified mail. Vivian signed for it on May 20th. 3 days later, the daily fine increased to $150. That's when I knew this wasn't going to end with letters and logic. This was going to get worse before it got better. And I needed to be ready for whatever came next. I left for my offshore rotation on May 23rd. 3 months on a platform in the Gulf, welding pipeline connections in water so dark you couldn't see your own hand 6 inches from your mask. Before I left, I made a decision that would change everything. I installed cameras. 4 of them, hidden in weatherproof housings that looked like outdoor light fixtures. 2 covering the dock from different angles. 1 pointed at my driveway and front entrance. 1 covering the backyard. All of them connected to cloud storage with motion detection alerts sent straight to my phone. If anyone came onto my property while I was gone, I'd know about it. The first alert came on May 26th at 2:30 in the afternoon. I was in the equipment room on the platform prepping my gear for an afternoon dive when my phone buzzed. Motion detected at rear camera. I pulled up the live feed and felt my blood pressure spike. Vivian was in my backyard, not alone. She'd brought the vice president and another man I didn't recognize, someone wearing a vest with Marine Survey printed on the back. They walked right past the no trespassing signs I'd posted straight down to the dock. The surveyor took measurements, photographs, and notes. Vivian pointed at different parts of the structure while talking. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but her body language told the story. This was someone conducting an inspection they had no legal authority to perform on property they had no right to enter. I didn't call the police, not yet. I just watched, saved the footage, and let them finish. 20 minutes later, they left. I downloaded the entire video file, backed it up in 3 different locations, and made a note in my evidence log. Trespassing. Unauthorized inspection. May 26th, 14:30 hours. 1 week later, I got a certified letter forwarded to the platform. It was an official inspection report, signed by someone named Clifford Dunham, licensed marine surveyor. According to his report, my dock was structurally unsound and in violation of Florida Building Code 2018, and it recommended immediate demolition to prevent public safety hazards. I read it twice, then pulled up Dunham's license information on the state database. He was licensed, sure, but his specialty was commercial maritime structures, ports, cargo facilities, industrial docks. He had no background in residential waterfront construction, and more importantly, he had no authority whatsoever to order demolition of private property. I called him from the satellite phone on the platform. It took 3 tries to get through. When he finally answered, his voice was cautious. "Mr. Dunham, this is Leland Pierce. You recently conducted an inspection of my boat dock." There was a pause. "I was hired by the homeowner association to provide an assessment." "Did they inform you that the dock is not within their jurisdiction?" I asked. "That it's private property on a separate parcel?" Another pause, longer this time. "They said it was part of the community waterfront." "It's not," I said, keeping my voice level. "And I need you to understand something. Filing a false inspection report on a structure can result in license revocation under state law. I have documentation proving this dock is structurally sound. If you proceed with enforcement action based on inaccurate findings, I'll file a complaint with the state licensing board." The silence on the other end stretched out. Finally, he said, "I'll need to review my assessment." "Good idea," I said. "And I'll need written confirmation that you're withdrawing any demolition recommendations." He agreed. 2 days later, I had an email stating he would not pursue further action regarding the structure in question. But Vivian wasn't done. On June 2nd, at 11:45 at night, my cameras caught 2 figures approaching the dock. They wore dark clothing, baseball caps pulled low, faces obscured. I watched from my bunk on the platform as they pulled out a battery-powered saw and cut through 2 of the support posts. The dock tilted, sagging on one side, suddenly dangerous in a way it hadn't been before. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was vandalism, destruction of property. I called the local police department immediately and sent them the video footage. A deputy arrived the next morning to document the damage. He took photos, wrote up a report, and asked if I had any suspects. I told him I had suspicions, but no proof. The video showed the vandals but didn't clearly identify them. What I didn't tell him was that I had another piece of footage from my driveway camera. Time-stamped at 11:17 that same night, 28 minutes before the vandalism. A car pulled up near my house, parking with the lights off. The license plate wasn't clear, but the make and model were. I sent that footage to my neighbor, the retired union worker who'd warned me about Vivian. He called me back 6 hours later. "That's the vice president's car," he said. "I'd recognize it anywhere. He drives it to every HOA meeting." I added it to my evidence log. Circumstantial maybe, but building. The pattern was becoming clear. They wanted this dock gone, and they didn't care what lines they crossed to make it happen. The letter from the county clerk's office arrived on June 10th, forwarded to the platform through my mail service. It was the kind of envelope that makes your stomach drop before you even open it. Official seal, legal weight. The subject line read, "Property Deed Update Notification." Inside was a single page explaining that my property deed had been modified per homeowner association request. Attached was a copy of a quitclaim deed, transferring ownership of the dock parcel from me to the HOA common area. The document had my signature on it, except I'd never signed it. I was 1,200 miles away on an oil platform when this deed was supposedly notarized. The signature looked close, but it wasn't mine. I knew my own handwriting. The notary stamp belonged to someone named Sandra Martinez. I looked her up in the Florida notary database that same day. Her license had expired in 2017, 2 years ago. She hadn't been legally authorized to notarize anything since then. I cross-referenced the business address listed on the notary stamp. It matched the office address of Vivian Cartwright's previous real estate brokerage. That's when I understood the scope of what I was dealing with. This wasn't HOA overreach anymore. This was forgery, identity theft, notary fraud. Under Florida Statute 117, falsifying a notarization is a third-degree felony, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. I filed 3 separate complaints within 24 hours. One to the county clerk requesting immediate reversal of the fraudulent deed. One to the Florida Department of State Notary Division reporting the illegal notarization. One to the county sheriff's office for identity theft and forgery. The responses came faster than I expected. The county clerk froze the deed change pending investigation. The notary division opened a formal case. The sheriff assigned a detective to look into it. For the first time since this started, I felt like someone in authority was actually paying attention. But Vivian had one more card to play. On June 15th, I woke up in my platform bunk to messages from my utility companies. My electricity had been disconnected. My water service had been terminated. Both companies said the same thing. The account holder, my homeowner association, had requested disconnection due to unpaid fees. I spent 2 hours on satellite phone calls trying to explain that HOAs cannot disconnect utilities for individual homes, that my utility accounts were in my name, paid automatically from my bank account, current and up to date. The customer service representatives were sympathetic but bound by policy. Someone claiming to be an authorized HOA representative had submitted disconnection requests. Until I could prove otherwise in person, the services would remain off. I was stuck on a platform in the middle of the Gulf with no way to fix it immediately. I had to hire someone local to go to the utility offices with copies of my lease, my ID, my account statements. It took 3 days and cost me $450 in hotel fees to get everything reconnected. 3 days without power in a Florida summer. My refrigerator had spoiled. The air conditioning had been off long enough that mold started growing in the bathroom. It was petty, vindictive, and probably illegal. I documented everything. But the final escalation came a week later. A bill arrived from something called Clearwater Marine Services. $15,000 for emergency structural repair and safety remediation of dock structure per HOA authorization. I'd never heard of Clearwater Marine Services. I pulled up the Florida Business Registry. No such company existed, no business license, no tax ID, nothing. The invoice listed a P.O. box as the return address. I looked up who owned that box. It was registered to the HOA vice president, the same man whose car had been near my house the night of the vandalism. They'd created a fake company, sent me a fake invoice, and were trying to collect $15,000 for work that was never performed. This wasn't just harassment. This was a fraud. Mail fraud specifically. And mail fraud is a federal crime. I called my attorney first. Then I called the FBI field office in Tampa. The agent who took my call was professional and direct. Mail fraud falls under U.S. Code 18, Section 1341. If you can prove they used the Postal Service to defraud you, that's a federal offense. The maximum penalty is 20 years. Her name was Agent Kowalski. She asked me to send everything I had, every document, every video, every piece of evidence I'd collected over the past 3 months. I spent an entire evening organizing files, writing a timeline, creating a clear narrative of escalation. When I hit send on that email, I felt something shift. This wasn't just me against an HOA board anymore. This was a federal investigation. A week later, Agent Kowalski called me back. After review, we're proceeding. What you've documented here shows a clear pattern of fraudulent activity. The fake deed, the false invoice, the utility disconnections. This goes beyond simple harassment. She paused. We're also going to look into whether this qualifies under RICO statutes. Racketeering. If the HOA board has been systematically defrauding multiple homeowners, that changes the scope significantly. I thought about what my neighbor had told me months ago. 3 families were driven out in 5 years, forced sales, violations that appeared out of nowhere. What if I wasn't the first victim? What if I was just the first one who fought back? Agent Kowalski had one more piece of advice. If they contact you again, especially in person, try to get it on record. Florida is a 2-party consent state for phone calls, but if you're on your own property, you have the right to record. We need them to incriminate themselves. I had a feeling I wouldn't have to wait long. The HOA was planning another meeting. This time, they'd specifically requested my attendance. An emergency session about my continued violations and outstanding debts. I marked the date on my calendar, June 20th. I'd be back from offshore rotation by then, and I'd be ready. Not just with documents and evidence, but with a recorder in my pocket and a clear understanding that every word they said could become part of a federal case. They thought they were backing me into a corner. They didn't realize they were building their own prison. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for July 1st at 7 in the evening. According to the notice, the purpose was a community vote on foreclosure proceedings against my property for unpaid fees. Under the HOA bylaws, foreclosure required 75% approval from residents. Vivian was clearly confident she could get it. I arrived 15 minutes early with a laptop, a portable projector I'd borrowed from a friend, and a folder thick enough to stop a bullet. The community center was more crowded than usual. Word had spread. People wanted to see how this ended. Vivian sat at the front table with her board, looking calm and composed. When she saw me setting up the projector, her expression flickered. Just for a second. Then the professional smile returned. She called the meeting to order at 7 sharp, went through the standard procedural nonsense. Then she got to the main event. We're here to vote on foreclosure proceedings against the property at Lakeshore Drive. Mr. Pierce has accumulated over $12,000 in unpaid fines and has refused all attempts at resolution. Before we vote, I'll allow him to make a statement if he wishes. I stood up. I'd appreciate that, and I think everyone here should know the full story before they vote on anything. I connected my laptop to the projector. The first slide appeared on the wall behind me. It was the deed for the dock, dated 1987, showing it as a separate parcel with its own tax identification number. This is the legal document proving I own that dock. It's not part of the HOA common area, never has been. The survey map filed with the county confirms it. I clicked to the next slide. The survey map with boundary lines clearly marked. Here's where the HOA jurisdiction ends, and here's where my dock sits, outside that boundary by 40 feet. I could see people leaning forward, actually looking at the evidence for the first time. Vivian's jaw tightened. Now let me show you what happened when I tried to resolve this dispute legally. Next slide, the quitclaim deed with my forged signature. This document was filed with the county in my name, supposedly transferring the dock to HOA ownership. The problem is I never signed it. I was on an oil platform in the Gulf of Mexico on the date this was allegedly notarized. Here's the notary stamp. I zoomed in on Sandra Martinez's information. This notary's license expired in 2017. She hasn't been legally authorized to notarize documents in 2 years. The business address on this stamp belongs to a real estate office formerly operated by your HOA president. The room went silent. I clicked again. Video footage appeared on the screen, time-stamped, high definition, 3 people walking onto my property without permission. This is from May 26th. That's your president, your vice president, and a surveyor conducting an unauthorized inspection of private property. The video played for 30 seconds. Clear trespassing. Undeniable. Next slide. The fake invoice from Clearwater Marine Services. This company doesn't exist. No business license, no tax registration. The P.O. box on this invoice belongs to your vice president. They tried to bill me $15,000 for work that was never performed. That's mail fraud, a federal crime. I let that sink in. Then I played my final card, the audio recording from the emergency meeting 3 weeks ago. Vivian's voice came through the speakers, crystal clear. That dock is worth far more than he realizes. If he knew what we had planned, he'd sell it to us for nothing. We have a $4 million Marina development ready to go. He's standing in the way of progress. The room erupted, not in anger at me, in shock at what they'd just heard. Vivian stood up, her face pale. That recording was taken illegally. It's not admissible. I smiled. Actually, Florida law allows recording in public spaces. The community center is a public facility, and admissibility doesn't matter because I'm not presenting this in court. I'm presenting it to your neighbors. I advanced to the final slide. Official correspondence from 3 agencies. The FBI is investigating this HOA board for mail fraud and potential RICO violations. The Florida Department of State is investigating notary fraud. The county sheriff has an open case for vandalism and identity theft. All of these investigations are active. All of them have the evidence you just saw. I turned to face the room. Before you vote on foreclosure, I want you to understand something. This isn't about a rotting dock. This is about an HOA board that's been abusing its power for years. How many of you have been fined for violations that seemed arbitrary? How many have paid penalties you didn't understand? How many felt pressured to sell and leave because it was easier than fighting? Hands started going up, slowly at first, then more. A woman in the 3rd row stood. I recognized her as someone who'd lived here for years. Vivian fined me $8,000 in 2015 for repainting my house the wrong shade of beige. I had to take out a loan. A man near the back. She pushed my family out at 2017, said our fence violated codes. We sold at a loss just to get out from under the fees. The testimonials kept coming, one after another, a pattern emerging in real time. I called for a vote. Before we discuss foreclosure, I moved to remove the current board for conflict of interest and abuse of authority. The vote wasn't even close. 68 in favor, 4 opposed, 94%. Vivian, the vice president, and the treasurer were removed from their positions effective immediately. The foreclosure vote never happened. 3 days later, the county clerk officially reversed the fraudulent deed. The notary division filed formal charges against Vivian. The sheriff arrested the vice president for criminal mischief and trespassing, and the FBI expanded their investigation to cover 8 years of HOA activity. Justice was slow, but it was coming. The civil lawsuit was filed in September of 2019. I was suing the HOA, Vivian personally, and the vice president personally for trespassing, harassment, fraud, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The damages I requested were $500,000, actual costs plus punitive damages for the sheer maliciousness of their conduct. My attorney Knox had warned me that civil trials move slowly. Discovery, depositions, motions, delays. He estimated we'd see a courtroom sometime in mid-2020. He was right. The trial began on a Tuesday morning in June, almost exactly 1 year after the forged deed incident. The HOA had hired a lawyer with 30 years of experience, a man who specialized in defending association boards against disgruntled homeowners. His opening argument was predictable. The HOA acted within its authority to protect community standards. Mr. Pierce refused to comply with reasonable regulations. His dock was a legitimate safety concern. Knox stood to respond. He didn't raise his voice. I didn't need to. The dock in question sits on private property with a separate deed recorded in 1887. The HOA has no jurisdiction over it. What they do have is a documented pattern of harassment, forgery, and fraud, and we will prove it. The first witness was a structural engineer, the woman I'd hired back in May to inspect the dock. She had a professional engineer license and 20 years of experience with marine structures. She testified clearly and precisely. I inspected the structure on May 15, 2019. It was stable, safe for recreational use. It required routine maintenance, but there was no immediate danger. The report filed by the HOA's surveyor was not accurate. The HOA's lawyer tried to challenge her. Are you certain there was no structural danger? She didn't hesitate. I staked my professional license on it. That dock was sound. The second witness was my neighbor, the retired union worker who'd seen the vice president's car near my house the night of the vandalism. He was nervous, his hands shaking slightly as he took the stand, but his testimony was solid. I saw the car parked near Mr. Pierce's property at 11:17 p.m. I recognized it because I see it at every HOA meeting. About 25 minutes later, I heard power tools. The next morning, the dock was damaged. The lawyer pressed him. Did you actually see anyone cutting the posts? He shook his head. No, sir, but I saw the car, I heard the saw, and I know what I know. Then came the video evidence. Knox played the footage on screens set up around the courtroom. Vivian, the vice president, and their surveyor walked onto my property without permission. The timestamp was clear, 2:30 in the afternoon, broad daylight, undeniable trespassing. Next was the surveillance footage from the night of the vandalism. 2 figures in dark clothing, the saw, the posts being cut. Then the driveway camera footage showing the vice president's car nearby at the right time. Knox let it play without commentary. The images spoke for themselves. Then came the documents. The forged quitclaim deed with my signature that I'd never made. The notary stamp from someone whose license had expired. The fake invoice from a company that didn't exist. Each one projected large enough for the jury to read every word. Knox called a handwriting expert who'd analyze the signature. This signature shows characteristics inconsistent with Mr. Pierce's authenticated writing. The pressure points are wrong. The letter formation is imitative rather than natural. In my professional opinion, this is a forgery. The HOA lawyer objected repeatedly, but the evidence kept mounting. Then came the FBI agent. She'd been subpoenaed as an expert witness to explain the federal investigation. We opened a case in June of 2019 based on evidence of mail fraud. During our investigation, we discovered a pattern extending back 8 years. 11 families reported similar experiences. Arbitrary fines, forced sales, properties acquired below market value by associates of the board. Total estimated damages exceed $800,000. We're pursuing RICO charges. The courtroom went completely still. RICO. Racketeering, influenced, and corrupt organizations. The kind of charge you associate with organized crime, not suburban homeowner associations. Finally, Vivian took the stand. The HOA lawyer asked her soft questions. Did you intend to harm Mr. Pierce? No. Did you act in good faith? Yes. Did you believe the HOA had authority? Absolutely. Then Knox stood for cross-examination. He played the audio recording. Vivian's own voice filled the courtroom. That dock is worth far more than he realizes. We have a $4 million marina development ready to go. He's standing in the way. Knox stopped the playback. You said this dock was worthless, but you also said it was worth $4 million in development potential. Which is it? Vivian's face flushed. I meant, hypothetically, if someone were to develop it properly. Knox pulled out printed emails. These are correspondence between you and a commercial developer dated February 2019. Quote, once we acquire the dock property, we can proceed with marina development. Revenue projections attached. He handed copies to the jury. You weren't protecting community standards. You were trying to steal private property for commercial gain. Vivian stammered. That's not... I was just exploring possibilities. Knox didn't let up. You forged documents. You filed false reports. You hired people to vandalize his property, all because you wanted to turn his $1 dock into your $4 million marina. She had no answer. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. The HOA was ordered to pay $250,000 in damages. Vivian personally owed $100,000. The vice president owed another $100,000. The judge added her own commentary. This court finds that the defendants engaged in systematic abuse of authority, harassment, and fraud. The HOA board is hereby ordered to issue a public apology in the community newsletter. Vivian Cartwright and the vice president are permanently barred from serving on any HOA board in this state. Outside the courthouse, reporters from local news stations waited. The story had gained traction. Small homeowner defeats corrupt HOA. David versus Goliath with legal documents instead of stones. I gave a brief statement. I didn't fight this for money. I fought it because what they did was wrong, and because I wanted my daughter to see that you don't back down when someone tries to take what's legally yours. Within 2 weeks, both Vivian and the vice president had put their houses up for sale. The neighbors stopped talking to them. The community they'd controlled for years had turned against them completely. Justice isn't always fast, but sometimes, when it finally arrives, it's absolutely worth the wait. I stood at the end of the dock on a Saturday morning in November of 2019, 3 months after the trial ended, and looked at the water. The posts stood, all 12 intact, and I had replaced what was damaged and strengthened everything else that mattered. The deck carried new planks. The whole place felt solid underfoot in a way finally earned today. Sloane's sign still hung on the first post, the blue paint faded but readable. Sloane's Landing. My daughter was coming that afternoon, and I'd promised her we'd go kayaking. But my mind was elsewhere, working through a decision that felt bigger than anything I'd faced so far. After the trial, after the checks cleared and the HOA paid what they owed, I spent weeks reconsidering the dock carefully. Not defense anymore, but potential, after sober talks with Knox. Vivian had been right about one thing. The location was valuable. Deep water access, direct channel to the bay, no other marina within 5 miles. I'd done some research, talked to commercial developers, and looked at feasibility studies. The numbers were staggering. A properly built marina with 20 boat slips could generate $15,000 a month in rental income. The property value would jump from the couple $100,000 I'd paid to several million. It wasn't about revenge. It was about transformation. Taking something they'd tried to destroy and turning it into exactly what they'd wanted but could never have because they'd chosen the wrong methods. In late November, I contacted a developer, someone with experience in small waterfront projects. His name was Archer, and he'd built 3 marinas along the Gulf Coast. We met at a coffee shop in Clearwater. I showed him the surveys, the water depth readings, and the legal documentation proving the clear title. He looked it over with the careful attention of someone who'd seen too many deals fall apart over bad paperwork. This is solid, he said finally. If you're willing to invest $500,000, I'll match it with $1.5 million. We can build a 20-slip marina, get it operational within 8 months. Revenue split 60-40 in your favor since you're providing the land. I did the math in my head. $500,000 was most of what I'd won from the lawsuit, plus a loan I'd have to secure. But the return potential was real. "There's one condition," I said. "It's called Sloane's Landing Marina. That name doesn't change." Archer smiled. "Deal." We broke ground in December. The construction took exactly 8 months, just like he'd promised. Watching that old dock transform was something I hadn't expected to be emotional about, but it was. The community watched too. Some of the same neighbors who'd stayed silent during the harassment came by to offer help. Porter, the retired union worker, helped with design suggestions. Others pitched in with marketing, legal paperwork, local permitting. It was like the neighborhood was trying to make amends for its earlier silence. By July of 2020, Sloane's Landing Marina was open for business. 20 boat slips, mostly for small recreational craft and kayaks. Every slip rented within 2 weeks. The monthly revenue hit $15,000 exactly as projected. I hired a professional manager to run day-to-day operations. I didn't want to quit my job as an underwater welder. That work still mattered to me, and I liked the rhythm of offshore rotations. But now I have passive income. $10,000 a month after expenses and management fees. Enough to cover Sloane's college fund, enough to provide security I'd never had before. By late 2020, a professional appraiser valued the marina property at $2.8 million. 2 years later, that number climbed to $4 million. $4 million. From a $1 dock that everyone had called worthless. The irony wasn't lost on me. In September of that year, I got an email from the new HOA board. They were different people now, elected after the scandal. Reasonable, professional, actually interested in serving the community rather than controlling it. The email was polite. "Dear Mr. Pierce, the board would like to discuss a partnership opportunity regarding Sloane's Landing Marina. We believe it could serve as a valuable community asset. Would you be open to selling the property to the HOA? We're prepared to offer $3.5 million. I read it twice, then called Knox. "They want to buy the marina," I said. "What do you think?" He laughed. "Poetic justice. What are you going to tell them?" I thought about it for a long time. Thought about the concrete block in my driveway, the forged documents, the sleepless nights wondering if I'd lose everything. Thought about Sloane asking why people were being mean about our dock. Then I thought about the sign she'd painted when she was 10 years old, still hanging on that first post. "I'm going to tell them no," I said. "This isn't about money. It's about showing my daughter that when you stand up for what's right, you don't just survive, you win. And you don't sell that lesson for any price." I sent a polite response declining their offer. The marina wasn't for sale, not to them, not to anyone. It was staying exactly what it had become, a testament to the fact that bullies don't always win, and that legal ownership backed by proper documentation is worth more than any amount of intimidation. Meanwhile, the criminal cases moved through the system. Vivian was convicted of notary fraud under Florida Statute 117. She received 2 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and a $10,000 fine. Her reputation was destroyed. She moved to another state within 6 months. The vice president was convicted of criminal mischief and fraud. He got 18 months in prison, suspended to probation, and lost his commercial broker license. He sold his house at a loss and left Florida entirely. The HOA itself was fined $50,000 by the State Department of Business and Professional Regulation. They were required to hire an independent management company and undergo annual financial audits. The era of unchecked board power was over, at least in our community. One Saturday in the summer of 2021, I brought Sloane out to the marina. She was 12 now, taller, more confident. We walked down the main dock, past boats bobbing gently in their slips, past families loading gear for afternoon fishing trips. She stopped at the first post, where her old sign still hung next to the new professional marina sign. "Dad," she said, "I can't believe this used to be that old broken dock." I put my arm around her shoulders. "You know what I learned from all this?" I asked. She looked up at me. "What?" "Sometimes the things other people think are worthless are actually treasures. You just have to be willing to fight for them." She smiled. "Is that why you kept my sign?" I nodded. "That sign is worth more than this whole marina, because it reminds me why I fought in the first place." We stood there for a while, watching the water. The lake was calm, reflecting the sky like glass, the same way it had been that first day I'd decided not to back down. My phone buzzed with a notification. Another slip rental. Another month of income from something built on a foundation of refusing to quit. I thought about Vivian sometimes, wondered if she ever drove past and saw what her greed had cost her. I wondered if she understood that if she'd just left me alone, I probably would have kept that dock exactly as it was, a rotting collection of wood posts that I'd eventually let decay into nothing. Instead, her harassment had forced me to defend it, and defending it had made me see its potential. The $4 million Marina existed because she'd tried to steal a $1 dock. That's the thing about bullies. They never understand that pushing someone into a corner doesn't always make them surrender. Sometimes it makes them fight back harder than they ever would have otherwise. I looked down at Sloane, at the marina spreading out behind us, at the calm water that had witnessed everything. "Come on," I said. "Let's go kayaking." She grinned, and we walked to the yellow kayaks, the same ones from 3 years ago. Some things don't change. We paddled into the lake, and for the first time in years I felt peace. Not from money or victory, but from showing my daughter the truth. Fight fair, stand tall, and never surrender your dignity.
Thanks for watching QA Stories. Share this video with someone who loves a good plot twist. And don't forget to subscribe.